6:30. She was supposed to meet her roommate. 7. Her phone died. 8. Her backpack was found abandoned, inhaler still inside. 9. Campus security posted her photo everywhere. 10. Police found the symbol. The doodle in Emma Hartley's planner wasn't random. It was identical to a marking carved into a tree 48 hours earlier, a marking that had been there since 1947, when 3 students entered tunnels beneath the school and came back wrong. One of them was Emma's great-grandmother. And now Emma had gone looking for answers in the same place that destroyed her family. 2 evenings, 200 searchers, 1 drawing that should have been impossible, and when they found her, the question wasn't, where was she? It was, what did she find down there? Stay with me, because this case still haunts everyone who worked it. And if you want to know why the investigators who rescued Emma refused to talk about what they saw in those tunnels, hit that like button and subscribe. Some mysteries don't end when you find the missing person. Sometimes that's when they truly begin. Ashford College sits in the heart of rural Connecticut, nestled between dense woods and the winding Pequot River. Founded in 1891, it's one of those institutions that trades on tradition. Ivy-covered brick, wrought iron gates, chapel bells that ring on the hour, the kind of place where alumni donate entire wings and freshmen wear school scarves like badges of honor. In October of 2003, it enrolled just under 3,000 students, most of them from New England families who valued legacy over innovation. Emma Hartley wasn't one of those students. She'd grown up in a small town outside Pittsburgh, the daughter of a high school teacher and a nurse, and she'd earned her spot at Ashford through sheer academic merit and a scholarship that covered most of her tuition. She was quiet, methodical, the kind of student who color-coded her notes and arrived 10 minutes early to every class. Her roommate, Jessica Torres, would later tell investigators that Emma kept her side of the dorm room so organized it felt like living next to a library display. Tuesday, October 15th, started like any other day. Emma woke at 6:45, showered, and made herself instant oatmeal in the communal kitchen on the 3rd floor of Whitman Hall. She attended her 9 a.m. English composition class, then spent 2 hours in the campus coffee shop reviewing for an upcoming biology exam. At noon, she ate lunch alone. Turkey sandwich, apple, bottled water, while reading a chapter on cellular respiration. Several students saw her in the library between 1 and 2:30, sitting in her usual spot near the 2nd floor windows, highlighter in hand. Her biology lecture began at 3 p.m. in Crawford Hall, a squat modern building on the western edge of campus. Professor David Milhouse taught introductory biology to a lecture hall of 80 students, and Emma always sat in the 3rd row, center aisle. That afternoon's topic was mitochondrial function. Milhouse would later recall that Emma took notes throughout the entire 50-minute session and asked a question about ATP synthesis near the end of class. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing felt wrong. The lecture ended at 3:50. Students filtered out through the main doors, backpacks slung over shoulders, conversations about weekend plans and upcoming midterms echoing off linoleum floors. Emma packed her notebook, zipped her backpack, and walked out with the crowd. 3 separate witnesses saw her leave the building and head south toward the library. Security footage from the library's entrance confirms she never went inside. And then, for exactly 93 minutes, Emma Hartley ceased to exist in any verifiable way. No one saw her. No cameras caught her image. Her phone, a basic flip model that couldn't be traced via GPS, never pinged another cell tower. She made no purchases, sent no emails, left no digital footprint. She simply walked into the autumn afternoon and vanished as if she'd stepped through a door only she could see. At 6:30, Jessica began texting her. At 6:45, she called. At 7:15, after the 5th call went straight to voicemail, Jessica walked across campus to check their usual dinner spot. Emma wasn't there. Jessica retraced the route between their dorm and the dining hall, growing more anxious with each empty sidewalk. At 7:40, she found Emma's backpack. It was lying on the ground near the southwest corner of the library, partially hidden beneath a hedge. The main pocket was unzipped. A notebook, 2 pens, and Emma's biology textbook were scattered within a 3-foot radius, damp from an afternoon drizzle. But her wallet was still inside, cash untouched. Her student ID remained in its plastic sleeve. And most troubling of all, her inhaler, which she carried everywhere due to moderate asthma, sat unused at the bottom of the bag. Jessica stood there in the fading light, holding that inhaler, and felt the first cold thread of real fear work its way up her spine. Campus security arrived within 12 minutes of Jessica's frantic call to the emergency line. Officer Patricia Brennan, a 15-year veteran who'd handled everything from noise complaints to medical emergencies, took one look at the scattered belongings and immediately radioed for backup. Protocol demanded they treat this as a potential abduction. The backpack's contents suggested struggle or panic. The missing inhaler suggested danger. By 8:30, 6 security officers were conducting a grid search of the immediate area. By 9, the local police had been notified, and Detective Raymond Kowalski, a methodical investigator who'd worked missing persons cases for the state police before transferring to the college's jurisdiction, arrived to take command. He was a compact man in his late 40s with the kind of patient, watchful demeanor that made witnesses trust him. He walked the scene 3 times before speaking, his flashlight beam tracing the pattern of scattered items. "She didn't run," he said finally, addressing Officer Brennan. "Look at the distribution. The notebook landed farthest from the backpack, which means it came out first, probably thrown. The textbook's closest, heaviest item fell straight down when the bag hit the ground. This reads like someone dropping everything in a hurry, not someone being grabbed." "Could she have seen something that scared her?" Brennan asked. Kowalski didn't answer immediately. He crouched beside the backpack, using a pen to flip through the contents without touching anything directly. No signs of force. Straps aren't torn. Zippers aren't broken. If someone grabbed her, they did it without touching her belongings first. He paused. Unless she dropped this herself and kept running. That possibility opened uncomfortable questions. Running from what? Toward what? And why leave behind medication she might desperately need? The search expanded rapidly. Officers checked every building she'd been in that day. They interviewed her professors, her classmates, the barista who'd made her coffee that morning. They pulled security footage from every camera within a quarter-mile radius. They called her parents in Pennsylvania. Her mother's scream when she heard the news would haunt Jessica Torres for years, and compiled a list of every person Emma had interacted with in the previous 72 hours. By midnight, over 50 volunteers had joined the search, organized into teams with flashlights and radios. They combed through wooded areas, checked storage sheds, searched parking lots. Helicopters weren't deployed, not yet, but the state police had put an aviation unit on standby. Emma's photograph was sent to every hospital, police station, and transportation hub within a 100-mile radius. And at 10 minutes past midnight, Detective Kowalski entered Emma's dorm room for the first time. Jessica had given permission, her hands shaking as she unlocked the door. The room was exactly as Emma had left it that morning, bed made with hospital corners, desk clear except for a small lamp, and her planner, textbooks arranged by subject on a narrow shelf. There were no signs of disturbance, no goodbye notes, no hints of depression or desperation, just the careful order of a disciplined mind. Kowalski moved slowly through the space, documenting everything with a camera. He photographed the closet, the bulletin board covered with class schedules and biology diagrams, the windowsill where Emma kept a small, succulent plant in a ceramic pot. And then his flashlight beam fell across her desk, and he saw the planner. It was open to October 15th. Emma's handwriting filled the margins in precise, looping script. Bio lecture, 3 p.m., study group library, 7 p.m., dinner, W. Jess, 6:30. Normal. Routine. Except beneath Tuesday's date, drawn in red ink with careful, deliberate strokes, was a symbol Kowalski recognized immediately. Not because he was an expert in obscure iconography, but because he'd seen that exact same mark, same size, same red ink, carved into an oak tree behind the maintenance building 2 days earlier during a vandalism investigation. A symbol that had been there for 60 years, long before Emma Hartley was born. The symbol consisted of 3 interlocking circles arranged in a triangular formation with a single vertical line descending from the center point where all 3 met. Simple enough to draw in under 10 seconds, cryptic enough to mean nothing or everything. When Kowalski had first seen it carved into the old oak tree Sunday morning, he'd photographed it as routine vandalism documentation and moved on. The groundskeeper had shrugged, said kids probably thought it looked mystical, and suggested they paint over it. Now, seeing an identical version drawn in Emma's planner, Kowalski felt his investigator's instinct shift from concern to alarm. This wasn't coincidence. This was connection. He called Officer Brennan back to the dorm room. "Do you have the vandalism photos from Sunday?" She pulled them up on her phone within 90 seconds. Same symbol, same proportions. The only difference was medium, carved bark versus red ink. Kowalski photographed Emma's planner from multiple angles, careful not to touch the page, then stepped into the hallway to make a call to the state police database analyst. "I need you to run something through historical records," he told her. "It's a symbol, 3 interlocking circles with a descending line. Cross-reference it with anything related to Ashford College, going back as far as records exist. Campus incidents, student organizations, architectural details, anything." While he waited for results, the search continued outside. Volunteers moved through the darkness with systematic determination, calling Emma's name, checking behind buildings and beneath staircases. The campus had taken on an eerie quality. Too many flashlights, too many urgent voices, too much movement in spaces usually silent after 10 p.m. Parents began arriving around 2 a.m., desperate and helpless, clustering in the security office waiting room. Jessica sat with Emma's mother in the dorm common area, both women red-eyed and hollow. Mrs. Hartley clutched her daughter's photograph, taken just 6 weeks earlier during freshman orientation. Emma smiling uncertainly at the camera, backpack over one shoulder, future stretched out before her like an unmarked road. "She was so excited," Mrs. Hartley whispered. "She called me Sunday night, told me she loved her biology class, said she'd finally found a study group that met her standards." Her voice cracked. "She wouldn't just leave. She wouldn't." Jessica nodded, throat too tight for words. She kept thinking about that abandoned backpack. The inhaler Emma needed, the planner that had been sitting on the desk all day, waiting. Why draw that symbol? Why red ink? Why that specific page? At 3:15 a.m., Kowalski's phone buzzed. The database analyst had found something. "The symbol appears in campus records from 1947, she told him, her voice carefully neutral. It was associated with a student organization called the Ashford Historical Society. They were disbanded after one semester due to," she paused, clearly reading from a report, "unauthorized access to restricted campus areas and conducting activities inconsistent with college values." "What kind of activities?" The records are vague. Mentions inappropriate explorations and disturbing campus operations. But here's what's strange. 3 members of that organization went missing during winter break of 1947. All 3 were eventually found, but the circumstances were never made public. The cases were sealed at the request of the college administration. Kowalski felt something cold settle in his chest. Where were they found? That's the thing. The location isn't in any of the public records. It just says they were recovered from an inaccessible campus location and received medical evaluation. All 3 left Ashford within a month and never returned. "Can you get those sealed records opened?" "I can try, but it's 3 a.m., detective. We're talking about files from 56 years ago. It'll take time." Time was something Emma Hartley might not have. Kowalski thanked the analyst and walked back outside, where the search teams were regrouping. Dawn was still 3 hours away. The October air had turned sharp and cold. And somewhere in the darkness, a 19-year-old girl was running out of time, or had already run out. At 4 a.m., a campus maintenance worker named Thomas Reeve approached Officer Brennan with information he'd been reluctant to share. Reeve was in his 60s, a quiet man who'd worked at Ashford for 32 years, mostly on night shifts. He'd watched the search unfold with increasing anxiety, and finally his conscience had overridden his caution. "There's a place students aren't supposed to know about," he told Brennan, his voice low, "beneath Morrison Hall, the old building on the North Quad." Morrison Hall was the oldest structure on campus, built in 1891, the same year the college was founded. It had been a dormitory once, then administrative offices, and was now mostly unused, except for storage. The building had a reputation among students as being haunted, though that was likely just the result of its age and isolation. "What kind of place?" Brennan pressed. Reeve shifted his weight uncomfortably. "A tunnel system. Connects Morrison to 3 other buildings. They were built for steam heating back when the college first opened, but they've been sealed off since the 1950s. Administration doesn't want students down there. Structural concerns, asbestos, that kind of thing. But kids find ways in sometimes. We board up the entrances, they pry them open again." Kowalski joined the conversation. "When was the last time you checked those tunnels?" "Officially, 6 months ago. But I saw fresh pry marks on the Morrison basement entrance last week. Didn't report it because I figured it was just kids exploring. Happens every few years." "Show me." They walked across campus in a tight group: Kowalski, Brennan, Reeve, and 2 additional officers. Morrison Hall loomed dark against the pre-dawn sky, its Victorian architecture lending it a Gothic severity. Reeve led them around to a side entrance, down a narrow staircase to the basement level, past storage rooms filled with forgotten furniture and obsolete equipment. At the far end of a concrete corridor, a heavy wooden door stood slightly ajar. The padlock that should have secured it lay on the floor, its hasp bent. Fresh scratches marred the doorframe. Kowalski shone his flashlight through the gap. Stone steps descended into darkness. The air that drifted up smelled of damp earth and rust and something else. Something organic and unsettling. "Emma!" he called down. His voice echoed, returned to him empty. They descended carefully, flashlights cutting through the blackness. The tunnel at the bottom was exactly as Reeve had described: arched stone ceiling, brick walls slick with moisture, pipes running along the upper corners. It extended in 2 directions, disappearing into darkness both ways. Water dripped somewhere in the distance. The temperature had dropped at least 15 degrees. And there, on the wall directly facing the stairs, drawn in what looked like fresh red marker, the symbol. 3 interlocking circles, vertical line descending. "She was here," Brennan whispered. They split into 2 teams, each taking one direction. Kowalski went left, his radio crackling as other officers reported their positions above ground. The tunnel stretched approximately 50 yards before branching into a T intersection. More symbols appeared at irregular intervals, always on the left wall, always in red. Emma had been marking her path, but marking it for whom? To find her way back, or to lead someone to her? The tunnel grew narrower. Kowalski had to duck beneath low-hanging pipes. His flashlight beam caught movement ahead. Not a person, just water dripping from a crack in the ceiling. And then he saw it. Another intersection. And in the center of the floor, Emma's phone. The screen was cracked, but the device still held a charge. Kowalski picked it up carefully, using a gloved hand. The last attempted call had been to Jessica at 5:47 p.m. yesterday, nearly 12 hours ago. After that, nothing. No messages, no calls, no activity. Just silence. Stretching down a tunnel that led somewhere Kowalski suddenly didn't want to follow. But he had no choice, because further ahead, barely visible in the flashlight's reach, he could see where the symbol stopped and where something else, something darker, began. The tunnel terminated in a circular chamber approximately 15 feet in diameter. The ceiling vaulted upward into darkness, suggesting they were directly beneath one of the older buildings. Kowalski's flashlight revealed walls covered in decades of graffiti, student initials, crude drawings, dates stretching back to the 1940s. And in the center of the chamber, a newer addition that made him call for immediate backup. A heavy wooden desk, completely out of place in the underground space with papers scattered across its surface. Emma's biology notebook lay open on the desk. Beside it, her planner, the real one, not the one they'd found in her dorm room. Kowalski approached carefully, radio in one hand, flashlight in the other. The papers weren't random. They were printouts of historical documents, newspaper clippings, and what appeared to be pages photocopied from old yearbooks. All of them related to the Ashford Historical Society from 1947. Officer Brennan arrived from the other tunnel direction, slightly out of breath. We found more symbols leading here from 3 different entry points. She wasn't lost, Detective. She was navigating. Kowalski began reading the documents by flashlight. The story they told was disturbing. In November 1947, 3 Ashford students, Richard Vance, Dorothy Kellerman, and James Pritchard, had gained access to these tunnels as part of their Historical Society research. They'd been investigating rumors that the college's founder, Nathaniel Ashford, had built something beneath the campus, something he'd ordered sealed before his death in 1903. The 3 students had found what they were looking for, a small chamber, likely the one Kowalski now stood in, where Nathaniel Ashford had allegedly conducted psychological experiments on volunteer students in the 1890s. The experiments had been an attempt to study isolation's effects on the human mind, and while they weren't violent or physically harmful, they'd been deeply unethical. Ashford had sealed the chamber and destroyed most records before the college's Board of Trustees could investigate. The 1947 students had spent 3 days and nights in these tunnels, documenting everything they found. But something had gone wrong. When they finally emerged, all 3 were described in sealed medical reports as severely disoriented and displaying signs of acute psychological distress. They'd claimed the tunnels moved and that time didn't pass correctly underground. The college had dismissed this as exhaustion and possible carbon monoxide exposure, sealed the tunnel entrances, and quietly paid the students' families to avoid legal action and public scandal. But here's what made Kowalski's hands shake as he read. One of the students, Dorothy Kellerman, had drawn the 3-circle symbol throughout her recovery journal. She'd written that it was the only way to find the way back, and that he showed us how to mark the path so we wouldn't disappear completely. Emma had found these documents. She'd recreated the symbol, and for some reason she'd come down here alone. She was researching this, Kowalski said aloud, pieces clicking together. The vandalism on Sunday, that wasn't random kids. That was Emma, testing the symbol, maybe trying to understand what those students in 1947 had experienced. But why? Brennan asked. Why would a freshman biology student care about a 70-year-old scandal? The answer lay in the last document on the desk, a family tree, hand-drawn in Emma's precise writing. At the bottom, her own name. At the top, Dorothy Kellerman's name, Emma's great-grandmother, who died in 1994 without ever speaking publicly about what happened in these tunnels. Emma hadn't been randomly interested in campus history. She'd been trying to understand what her great-grandmother had experienced. She'd been trying to prove or disprove the impossible claims that had shadowed her family for 2 generations. And then, somewhere in this underground darkness, she'd found something. Or something had found her. Emma! Kowalski's voice boomed through the chamber, echoing up through the vaulted ceiling. Emma Hartley, if you can hear me, we're here! You're safe now! Silence. And then, faintly, from somewhere above them, a sound like knocking. 3 deliberate strikes. Pause. 3 more strikes. Someone was directly overhead, trying to signal through the floor. The chamber sat directly beneath the old chapel, a building that had been locked and unused since a renovation project began 3 months earlier. Kowalski and Brennan sprinted back through the tunnels, up the stairs, across campus to the chapel's main entrance. The renovation team's padlock had been jimmied open, recently within the past 24 hours. They found Emma Hartley on the chapel's second-floor balcony in the organ loft, unconscious but breathing. Her skin was cold, her lips slightly blue, but her pulse was steady. She'd used her jacket as a blanket and positioned herself near an old heating vent, likely seeking warmth. An empty water bottle sat beside her, along with the remnants of a granola bar from her backpack. The paramedics arrived within 6 minutes. Emma regained consciousness during the ambulance ride to the hospital, disoriented but coherent enough to ask if someone had found her notebook. She was treated for dehydration, mild hypothermia, and acute exhaustion. Physically, she would recover completely within 48 hours. Psychologically, the impact would take longer to process. Detective Kowalski interviewed her the following afternoon, with her parents present and a counselor on standby. Emma's story emerged in careful, measured sentences. She spoke the way she took notes, organizing information before releasing it. She'd found the historical documents in the college archives 3 weeks earlier while researching a biology paper on genetic predispositions to anxiety disorders. Her great-grandmother's name had appeared in an unrelated file, piquing her curiosity. The deeper she dug, the more questions emerged. What had really happened in those tunnels? Had there been genuine psychological effects, or just trauma from isolation? On Tuesday afternoon, after her biology lecture, Emma had made a decision. She would enter the tunnels herself, replicate the conditions the 1947 students experienced, and document everything scientifically. She'd marked her path with symbols copied from her great-grandmother's journal. She'd timed her exploration carefully, in and out within 2 hours, well before dinner. But she'd made one critical error. The tunnel system was far more extensive than she'd realized, and without a proper map, she'd gotten disoriented. When she tried to retrace her steps, she'd found herself going in circles. Her phone had died. Her attempts to call for help had failed before she'd entered the deepest sections where there was no signal at all. Eventually, she'd found a ladder leading up to the chapel's subfloor. She'd climbed through a maintenance access panel, collapsed in the organ loft, and waited for someone to find her. She'd tried knocking on the floor periodically, hoping someone would hear, but the chapel was isolated, empty, locked. She'd had no way to know that above ground, 200 people were searching desperately for any sign of her. The red ink in her planner, the doodle that ultimately led investigators to understand her research, had been added 4 days before her disappearance. She'd been planning this exploration, documenting the symbol, preparing, but she'd told no one, fearing they'd try to stop her. "I just wanted to understand what she'd experienced," Emma told Detective Kowalski, referring to her great-grandmother. "I wanted to know if it was real, or if she'd just been scared and alone, and that fear had created false memories." Kowalski had looked at this exhausted, brilliant, reckless young woman and felt a complicated mixture of relief and frustration. "And did you find your answer?" Emma had been quiet for a long moment. "The tunnels are just tunnels," she'd finally said. "Stone and water and darkness. There's nothing supernatural down there. But I understand now why she was so changed by it. When you're that alone, that lost, your mind starts creating patterns where none exist. The fear becomes the haunting. The symbol was just a symbol. The mystery was just human vulnerability, meeting isolation, meeting a desperate need to believe our trauma means something larger than simple fear." Emma returned to classes 2 weeks later. The tunnels were permanently sealed with concrete, and sometimes, late at night, she still dreams of underground darkness and the sound of her own footsteps, echoing back to her like questions that never quite find their answers. Some mysteries we solve, some we simply survive.